I think I've discovered truly one of the most pathetic moments I've ever seen from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. A clip, like always, that he posted to his own social media account, not realizing how much of a self own it actually is. So, Trudeau the other day went on the podcast of Nate Erickson-Smith. He is a fellow Liberal MP who happens to do his own podcast while he's in office, which I actually think is an interesting concept that a politician actually keeps doing media work because your only job is to communicate. And even though I disagree with Nate Erickson-Smith on absolutely everything, I think this is at least useful to do as a politician. But Justin Trudeau went on this podcast to talk about his biggest regret in terms of an unfulfilled promise. And it's the most self serving thing I've ever seen in my life and looks utterly pathetic. Just check this out.
What do you see as, if I could have that one back, I would do it differently the next time?
Electoral reform.
Yeah, music to my ears.
You
said that just for me, right?
I don't say that just for you.
He says it for himself because currently Justin Trudeau and the Liberals are on average anywhere from 19 points underneath the Conservatives to 22 points. They've even been in one poll 26 points below the Conservatives with those who were certain to vote. He is absolutely dead in the water right now. So, of course, he regrets not pursuing electoral reform because at least proportional representation would allow the Liberals, in theory, to hold on to 22% of the electorate. The NDP might be able to get 20. The Greens might be able to cobble together 5 or so, and they can keep the Conservatives out. That's the only reason that he now regrets not having proportional representation, because before he thought the current system, first past the post, advantaged him, so he wants this one. And this is also why we should never change the electoral system, because we have this one, we've had it forever, and so nobody is changing it to try and benefit themselves. The only people asking for the system to be changed are those who it would benefit. And even they tend to be very inconsistent, because people who are in favor of proportional representation still put up arbitrary barriers, like, you still have to have 5% of the vote to be able to win a seat. Well, why not 0.3% would be if you had a certain rate, or it was actually only be 0.25% to get a seat. Why wouldn't that be how it works? We don't want parties too small to getting in. Okay, well then just admit that you just want the Green Party to have more seats, but you don't want the Christian Heritage Party or the Marxist-Leninist Party to win a seat, because that's really what you're doing here. But I'll let Justin Trudeau keep going and justifying himself.
Actually, in one sense, I do say it just for you, because I know in just about any other interview,
I was going to raise it.
Any other interview, the interviewer's eyes glaze over, go, okay, yeah, but give me something real that you regret, right?
Yeah.
I said, no, this is real. For me, I look at where the world is going and where polarization has happened and where excesses of populism have been able to come in. And
Okay, I just disagree with his language of excesses of populism, especially in the Canadian context. If there were excesses of populism, you would maybe think we'd be getting tons of PPC politicians elected. Not that the people who vote for the PPC or even run for them are bad, but a party where it's just very loud figures jumping into politics who don't really maybe have very fully formed ideas, but they're angry at the current government, so they want to take over, not knowing really what they're specifically doing. Again, no shade at the PPC guys out there, but the Conservatives are an example. The federal Conservatives who have traded governments with the Liberals for over 100 years, they're an example of the excesses of populism. They're not. You're just unpopular. Everyone, I'm actually not the biggest guy in terms of liking populism, because I do find that populism actually doesn't mean anything, because it's a changing definition. It's whatever's popular. And sometimes whatever's popular is not particularly right, and you have to argue for the right ideas. But Trudeau's definition is basically just populism run amok is just when I'm not popular. He was technically elected in 2015 on a wave of populism. The Conservatives had gotten stodgy, and so we want, sunny ways in Canada. So we elected Justin Trudeau. That's another example of why I don't like populism. People like Justin Trudeau frequently benefit from it from time to time. But no, there's not we needed to stop the wave. So he's admitting that he wants proportional representation to stop who he views as his primary political opponents now.
winner take all version of first past the post that we have right now, where you can get elected as the MP for 100% of people in your riding with 32% of the vote, if it's properly divided, if it's divided amongst other parties, is not just devaluing the votes of so many others, but it's giving you a false sense of being the only legitimate voice for your community. And
is Trudeau telling on himself? Because this is very much how he typically acts, is that he is, because he has a majority government back when he did, that he's the one who speaks for Canadians. Even with minority governments, he pretends that because the Conservatives cannot get their no confidence motion through, simply because other parties are politically interested in blocking it, not that Canadians don't support it, that means the Conservatives are unpopular. The man contradicts himself like habitually. The man cannot keep a consistent position on absolutely anything. And the idea, and really he's just salty about the Montreal by-election that happened recently, where his party got like 27% of the vote and he got beat out by the Bloc, who had like 28%, and then the NDP had 27%. And what I'm just going to say to that is it happens. It sometimes happens in a first past the post system. But look at the vast majority of seats. It's usually someone winning with 48% of the vote, 52%. You go to rural areas for Conservatives, 82% of the vote. And what should we have the person control the riding who got 17% of the vote, 20% of the vote? I hope we would pick the person who got the most vote, because the point of electoral systems is to elect a government who is at least a coherent voice. That's why I don't like proportional representation. It leads to very incoherent governments where nobody gets what they want. And not like the nobody gets what they want in the sense of like the US, where there's a lot of checks and balances and a lot of push and pull. In the US, actually, people tend to get what they want because of the freedom of being able to vote against your own party and whatnot. But in Canada, when all the parties mostly just vote down the line of what the leader wants, it leads to just pure gridlock on PR systems. PR systems do not tend to be stable. Just look at Israel. They have an election every 5 minutes because every single time they go back, people vote for their extremely niche interests. And then you end up in another government where you have to partner with like 5 or 6 parties who don't want to do most of what you want to do. And they think that they deserve to have everything that they want just because they're upholding your government. It's insane.
If I could do things differently, I don't know exactly how I would have, but I certainly would have done things differently around electoral reform to try and make sure that we are not going to be fighting this next election under first past the post again.
Yeah, this easily in 9 years, the worst day I had as a Liberal caucus member was the day we broke that promise. It looked, I mean, it looked a little bit cynical to say, oh, we can't figure out a path, and so we're gonna, just burn it to the ground, never talk about it again. That's probably not how you would feel about it.
I made two big mistakes on this one. The first one,
I would say the first one was promising in the first place. It was just, again, a dumb populist talking point for the 2015 election, who Trudeau had no reason to fulfill because he won the 2015 election on a very first past the post basis. He didn't get the majority of the votes, but he got the majority of the seats. And that was fair at the time. Frankly, the Conservatives and the campaign director at the time, Jenny Byrne, ran a bad campaign. And even though Harper is 10 times the Prime Minister Justin Trudeau will ever imagine he is, that at the same time, if you run a bad campaign and you lose, it's kind of on you.
Because of some very strong voices in my caucus who were very, very clear that they wanted to at least be able to make an argument for proportional representation, which I feel very, very strongly would be a mistake for Canada. I left the door open to proportional representation instead of ranked ballot, even within my own team. And that made a whole bunch of people who heard me say last election is first past the post, translate that into he's going to bring in proportional representation, which I was not, which I never.
Oh, so he doesn't want proportional representation because that wouldn't quite benefit the Liberals even more than he'd want to. We can probably end this right here. I want to actually move on to another clip of a Liberal cheerleader online who doesn't believe in polls because really they just show the Conservatives ahead, but they're biased towards the Conservatives even though they've been shown to be consistently right. But Trudeau doesn't want proportional representation. He wants ranked balloting because the Liberals, in theory, are the middle party. They're really fairly to the left these days, but because the NDP's a little bit more left and the Bloc are kind of, depending on the Bloc constituency, they're either a little bit to the left of the Liberals or a little bit to the right, but they also rely on the Liberals to get all their Quebec nationalist type policies and benefits passed in Parliament, that he believes that people rank a ballot eventually, especially if Conservatives can't win a riding or the NDP can't win, they all eventually have to pick the Liberals. Because if you're a Conservative, you ain't picking the Greens, you're not picking the NDP because they're worse. It doesn't mean the Liberals are good. It just means that the Liberals are 90% the worst thing you've ever seen in your entire life, and the NDP are 95% the worst thing you've ever seen in your entire life, and the Greens would be 100% the worst thing you've ever seen in your entire life. It's a false choice, and that's why I don't often like voting systems like this. It's fine for like a leadership race where you're picking between personalities and individuals within a party, so nobody inherently dislikes the other people. Nobody disagrees fully, but is forced to pick the guy. That's not how that works in parties, which is good. But in general national elections, it means that voters are coming up with a fake majority consensus over candidates that they have no interest in, when you, in theory, the Conservative candidate could have gotten 45% of the vote. 45% really strongly liked him. But he doesn't get to win because a bunch of other parties that might have only gotten 10% on the first ballot and 7 and 25 and whatnot, they just keep jamming their stuff together until they have 51% of the votes, and they're not actually really representing even their own people who are having to pick them down ballot any in a strong way, where the 45% would get strongly represented. They believe in the Conservative Party's platform, and then the other side, who gets 51% after you put a bunch of votes together, well, they kind of believe in it. I guess they like them a little bit better than the Conservatives, but that's not coherent. And that's my point, is that I don't like voting systems that lead to very incoherent, vague outcomes. And just because somebody gets elected doesn't mean it's not vague. It's vague because you don't really know what people got out of this. Anyways, now I want to jump to this next little thing. This next actually was still on the same bookmark page. Now I want to go look over at this guy's TikTok video. His name's Creek Pete online, a massive, smug, liberal TikToker, whatever. I don't know in terms of he's actually big in terms of TikTok. I just mean he's a massive liberal cheerleader. Extremely pompous. You'll get a full blast of his personality quite quickly here. But I find stuff like this hilarious in how pathetic it is. Maybe even more pathetic than what we just saw from Justin Trudeau. Warning, he does swear a little bit in this video, and I don't have the tech to go ahead and edit it through and remove it before we do this video.
Here's the deal. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm a realist. I look at things and make my own judgments, just like everybody else. But I'm going to say straight out, I think polls are bullshit. And I'll tell you why. I'll show you why I came to this conclusion. It's been something that I've been saying for a while.
He looked at the polls. He saw the Liberals weren't ahead, and that's how he came to the conclusion. Let's be real here. If a poll showed the Liberals doing well, he would suddenly believe in polls.
But they are definitely being used as a tool for manipulation right now. And when you see that poll after poll after poll is coming out every second day, basically now, there has to be a motivation behind that.
Polls are coming out often because there's a lot of polling firms that do it. I don't know what this man's point is. Creek Pete. Well, he's like, oh, poll after poll is coming out and it's showing the Conservatives ahead. I'm like, yeah, also the by-elections are showing the Conservatives are doing well. Even in Montreal, they got 13% of the vote, and people are like, oh man, the Conservatives came in 4th place. Yeah, they got 7% last time. It's Montreal. They still improved their vote. In the Manitoba by-election in Winnipeg, they went from having like 25% of the vote to like 43 or whatever. It was like super close between them and the NDP. The polls have actually been pretty accurate. And before he goes into what he's about to say, know this. The polling firms do most of their political polling for free because they use it as free advertising to show how good they are at market research. So when an election comes around, they're incentivized to be as accurate as possible, unless it's like a strategy firm or a public affairs firm that's obviously biased towards one way or the other, and they get their money from specific people on the political spectrum, so they like to push out numbers that help their party. That's pretty rare. Council Public Affairs in British Columbia and Alberta obviously do that. Like 4 days before the Alberta provincial election, popular vote like poll. This is not seats poll. It was a close election on seats, but not the popular vote. 4 days before the Alberta election, Council Public Affairs says, oh yeah, the Alberta NDP are up 5% provincially. The UCP won by 8.6%. That is a 13.6% miss. That's called being bad at polling, or that's called a fake made-up poll. I don't know which one it is. Maybe they just use a panel that they know is biased to the NDP, and they just fart out those numbers because they think it's good for morale, but, you know, that's not real polling.
Also, you have to look at who's doing this polling, right? And which polls are being pushed on us. So,
pushed on us, they're just being released into the public.
Here's my conclusion. They're fucking bullshit, and I'll show you why. Here's the man, Angus Reid himself, retweeting far-right loons on Twitter. Shame on Trudeau, completely on.
I know Alex Zoltan, he's not a far-right loon. He's actually a very good researcher.
To legitimize church burning.
And there are churches being burned by arsonists all over the place. There was just this one instance that happened to be an actual construction site accident that they're now using to pretend that church burnings have not been happening.
Because that happens, right? Trust this guy's polls? I think not. Here's David Coletto. He's a pollster for Sun News. For sure. Here's David.
For context, David Coletto runs the firm Abacus Data.
Hanging out at the Manning Center. For sure. I trust this guy. For sure. Totally not biased. These guys are totally non-biased pollsters that we should totally believe. Okay. You could do what you want. You could believe the polls all you like, but don't let them manipulate you into believing a narrative that isn't necessarily the truth. Okay? Anyway, have a good one.
Does this guy put any weight into the fact that the polls have been right about the by-elections? Janet Brown in Alberta was the most accurate pollster in that entire province, and she was one of the most hawkish people on behalf of the UCP, believing that the UCP was going to win. You know, I like not like in terms of being a conservative biased person. I actually believe Janet Brown's a little bit more on the center left, but all the pollsters are showing the Conservatives winning. Like I want to bring up 338 right now just for their federal polls. I'll just remove this. I'll just remove the other thing from my presentation feed. I'm just going to bring this up on screen. I know people think that Kudo Maggie from Main Street Research is like conservative because he is friendly with conservatives online, but getting rid of that. What Nick Nanos is very left, plus 20. What's your point? Creek Pete, Abacus. Oh, I guess they're biased. That's why they gave him 2 points more. But Leger, 20. Ecos, Frank Graves, very to the left. Like he bakes in left-wing bias questions into his polls where he asks conservatives questions about disinformation, and he always concludes, "Oh, conservatives believe the most disinformation," because he only throws questions that conservatives believe in disinformation, and half the time his questions don't actually indicate whether somebody believes disinformation or misinformation or not. He just simply it's basically the world according to Frank Graves. But relay strategies, Ipsos, again, Nanos. We have tons of pollsters here that are all showing the the conservative smashing. Where is the bias with all these? Did he go through them? He has 2 people apparently that are putting out bad polls, but they're all agreeing with each other. And they're predicting by-elections. This is what predicted all this national polling is what predicted the Toronto St. Paul by-election was going to be super close and the Conservatives won it, even though other people are saying, oh, it's a downtown Toronto riding. Of course it's going to go Liberal. Guys, the polling is accurate. And even just the smug delivery from Creek Pete there, oh, you believe the polls, oh, you're going to believe these people's misinformation, like he's always about to start laughing in the middle of his video. You don't know what you're talking about, and you're snickering your way through your video to cover for the fact that you actually don't have a point, but you're going to act like everyone else is just so ridiculous. I have it all figured out, guys. I'm a middle-aged man with a beer gut, filming myself on my own couch talking about politics. I'm on my couch too, but don't listen to me just because I say something, or don't believe me just because I say something. Believe me because I can show you some data or have a factual-based argument, not this garbage on TikTok. And why do they think so many young people are going conservative? Because these are the left-wing representatives on the platforms they're using. Just absolute pawn scum garbage content. Steve Boots, Frank Graves, that JV Politics 101 guy, Creek Pete. These are your representatives of liberalism on social media. It's pathetic. It's pathetic. Some of them are NDP, but I'm just using liberalism or leftism as a more of a catch-all. It's so bad. Smugness in place of actually having any clue what you're talking about. Anyways, that should be it for me today, guys. A quick update on the channel. I finally replaced the thing holding my laptop. This was the old one. You can see it's actually coming apart. There was missing a bolt, and this is why you guys would hear like my microphone constantly like banging, because this thing would bang, or the laptop when I was clicking it would like vibrate, and it would vibrate the microphone. Maybe there's still microphone banging because I'm just particularly incompetent, but this was the bane of my existence. It's like made of aluminum. And I've replaced it one that's fully steel and has a bigger weight on the bottom. Cost me a little bit, but it's worth it. But if you want to support the show, I have a link in the description below for the legal fund. It's on Give, Send, Go. We have a Chinese billionaire suing us over nothing. He's just suing us for defamation that in basically 3 years he has not substantiated. I believe on like the 1st of December or late November, that's the anniversary, 30-year anniversary of this lawsuit going on. So if you want to help me out, that really helps. If you contribute to that, it cost me over $33,000 fighting this guy. You know, he's dragging it out at this point because he knows he can't win, and I'm going to be pursuing the win because we don't like bullies on the National Telegraph. And I guess in the future, so contribute to that if you want, pinned to both in the description and the comments below. I'm going to be trying to get Daniel Boardman on to do more shows with me, to do more solo shows on stuff more in Eastern Canada, as well as foreign policy stuff, and try and do more joint live shows. So if you haven't seen me do a live stream in a while, it's because I'm out door knocking in British Columbia for the BC Conservatives. Don't have a lot of time. I had the BC NDP trying to attack me yesterday over something that I was fully right about, saying one of their candidates who calls themselves a trade unionist is in fact a trade unionist. Trade unionism is not just being in favor of trade unions. Trade unionism is what you call syndicalism, because that's the English word taken from, like, trade unionism is the English word for syndicalism. It's about the idea that unions should not just monopolize all labor, that all labor should be unionized. It means that unions should control businesses. All the businesses should be run by the unions, which is an insane far left, fascistic, socialistic concept. That's also what fascism means, trade unionism. Oh, all these people don't know what they're talking about, but they tried to attack me and it absolutely flopped as hard as, like, you know, a fat guy jumping into a pool. Just how it works out sometimes. Have a good one, guys.